Showdown in the US. The remaining teams stayed behind to release what would come to be known as Super Street Fighter II in October 1993. With this version came many more updates. These range from updated graphics, backgrounds, character animations, special moves, character portraits, a new scoring system, a combo counter, and new voices for the announcer and some characters. The biggest update was the 4 new characters from the early Street Fighter III concepts that were added to the roster. There was T-Hawk, a large Native American from Mexico, Cammy, a Special Forces agent from England, Fei Long, a martial artist and movie star from Hong Kong who resembles Bruce Lee, and Dee Jay, a kickboxing musician from Jamaica. While these new characters were initially met with resentment among longtime fans, they soon became just as beloved as the original 12. Other fans had gripes like the new voices for the announcer and Guile were much worse than the originals. More importantly, the game speed was slower than the recent Hyper Fighting version and more akin to the Champion Edition version, so it felt like a step backwards for hardcore enthusiasts. In 1994, Capcom released another update with Super Street Fighter II Turbo, which not only increased the speed of the game from Super, but also gave the player the option to adjust the speed to their liking. Air combos were introduced, which allowed players to attack their opponents with juggling moves. Also, Super Turbo introduced the Super Combo Gauge, which, once filled, allowed the player to unleash a very powerful version of a character's attack. Unbeknownst to many players, Super Turbo included a hidden character. His name was Akuma, or Goki in Japan. Players would be able to play as him and fight him as the final boss when playing through the game under certain circumstances. He featured the best aspects of Ken and Ryu and played similarly to them, but was overpowered. Super Street Fighter II Turbo would be the last version of the game to be released in arcades. Ever since Capcom found success with the game, it wasn't long before many other companies began creating their own interpretations of the genre. SNK had created games like Art of Fighting, Fatal Fury, and The King of Fighters. Nintendo published the combo-intensive fighting game Killer Instinct. Sega brought it to the third dimension with Virtual Fighter. Even Data East, the company responsible for the first fighting game Karate Champ, released Fighter's History, which many considered more of a rip-off than a competitor. Capcom attempted to keep up with their competitors by updating their game as much as possible. However, many fighting game fans began to draw away from them with the release of Mortal Kombat 2. This game led to one of the biggest rivalries in the arcades and console video games. Not only did the game bring more of the violence that brought it much controversy, but it brought with it a game that many viewed as having deep and varied gameplay on par with Street Fighter II. So despite Capcom's best efforts, their game soon began to appear stale and outdated compared to its competitors at the time. The game's last arcade update was ported to several game consoles at the time, but failed to match the sales of previous entries. In the following years, Capcom began to face a decline not only in the arcades, but within their company as well. In 1995, longtime programmer and designer Akira Nishitani left Capcom to form his own company, Arika, and took more of the original Street Fighter II team with him. Future updates to Street Fighter II continued to be released, but only on consoles as ports or compilations. In 2000, Capcom released Super Street Fighter II X on the Dreamcast, which featured an online versus mode, but it only saw a limited release in Japan. The next year, Super Turbo was remade for the Game Boy Advance. Super Street Fighter II Turbo Revival featured simplified controls and updates such as redrawn character artwork. To commemorate the 15th anniversary of the series, Capcom released Hyper Street Fighter II in 2003, which was a hybrid version of Super Turbo where players could choose to play a character from any version of Street Fighter II. The game was released in a compilation disc for the PS2 and Xbox. In 2007, Capcom announced they would be resurrecting Street Fighter II with an official 6th version. The game would bring with it redrawn graphics in high definition, rebalanced gameplay, online play, and feature an arranged soundtrack from the video game tribute website Overclocked Remix. It was developed by Backbone Entertainment and headed by David Sirlin, a longtime fan and tournament player of Street Fighter II. After a long development period filled with numerous delays and beta testing, the game was finally released on PlayStation Network and Xbox Live Arcade on November 25, 2008. The new character sprites and backgrounds were drawn by the comic book publisher Udon Entertainment. Players were given the option to change the game mechanics to their choosing, as well as the game sprites and music to its original version. Upon its release, the game received much praise from critics and fans for many of its improved aspects. The remixed soundtrack was seen as a great tribute to the game's original music. The gameplay tweaks designed by David and his team resulted in improving the fighting system. For many, it truly was a game designed for the fans, by the fans. The game proved to be a big success for Capcom both critically and commercially. It broke current first day and first week sales records and sold 250,000 units in less than a month's time. Street Fighter II remains one of Capcom's biggest and successful franchises. To this day, the original Super Nintendo port of Street Fighter II is still their top-selling video game of all time. Still, after its initial release, the company continued striving to make the best possible fighter on the market by continuing to tweak and balance the game. This would become a common trend with many of Capcom's future fighting games. While the company eventually went on to develop other fighting games, the memories of Street Fighter II's impact continues to stay in fans' hearts. Long after the decline of the arcade scene, fans' desire to return so much that remakes and updates for the game have still continued even after 20 years. Street Fighter II's legacy has proven to surpass the original as well as its former competitors because not only did it bring so many innovations to the genre, but because it remained fun and easy to play for gamers with any level of experience. And because of that, it has become viewed by fans and even developers as one of the greatest video games of all time. Next time, in Part 3 of the Street Fighter Retrospective, Capcom looks for a new direction for Street Fighter by first looking back at its past. It would introduce the fans younger versions of our favorite characters, the return of familiar faces, and another spin-off that would become a popular puzzle game.